What if a single TV moment could flip everything you thought you knew about a show upside down? That's exactly what went down on a random morning at The View. Everyone figured it'd be just another typical episode, same old debates, same tired arguments. But then, something wild happened that left the whole studio speechless and sent the internet into a total frenzy. Whoopi Goldberg, the big name who'd been steering the show for years, was about to face off with Caroline Levitt, a bold conservative voice who wasn't afraid to push back. And trust me, this wasn't going to end how anyone expected. So what sparked this chaos? How did it all unfold? Let's dive into the blow-by-blow and figure out how Caroline turned the tables so fast. Oh, and stick around. Drop a comment at the end and tell me what you think about the showdown. The cameras started rolling, and the audience got comfy, expecting the usual View vibe. The topic? Misinformation in politics and media bias. Nothing new there. As Caroline Levitt stepped into the spotlight, it was obvious she was walking into a setup. Whoopi Goldberg, perched at the head of the table, didn't waste a second. Her face already screamed, "I've got this," and she kicked things off with a jab. Today we've got Caroline Levitt, a spokesperson for conservative ideas. "Oh, we've got a lot to unpack here," she said, smirking. A few people in the crowd chuckled, but Caroline? She just nodded politely, cool as ever. Whoopi leaned in, ready to take charge. "So, Caroline, let's cut to it. Conservative media's been pumping out misinformation left and right. How do you even justify that?" It was a classic move. Toss out a big accusation to throw your guest off balance. But Caroline didn't stumble. She took a slow breath, rested her hands on the table, and fired back calmly. "I think the real question is, who gets to say what's misinformation? Because I've seen plenty of times when networks like this one get it wrong too." The room buzzed. A few co-hosts squirmed in their seats. Whoopi's expression hardened. "Oh, come on," she snapped. "We check our facts here. We don't spread lies." Caroline tilted her head, a tiny glint in her eye. "Really? No mistakes ever?" "I could name a couple of times that didn't hold up." Boom. The mood shifted hard. This wasn't Caroline scrambling to defend herself. She was flipping the script, taking the reins. Whoopi felt it, and she wasn't happy. The air got thick with tension, but she wasn't about to let it go. She leaned forward, her voice getting sharper. "Please, Caroline, don't sit there acting like conservative outlets haven't been caught pushing total nonsense. We're here for facts, not wild theories." Some folks in the audience clapped, but Caroline didn't blink. She waited, letting Whoopi's words hang there. Then Whoopi went bigger. "And honestly, people like you are why this country's a mess right now. You play this poor me card, whining about being shut down, while your side drowns out anyone who disagrees." The crowd gasped. Things were getting personal. Even the other hosts looked uneasy. Caroline raised an eyebrow but stayed quiet, letting Whoopi keep digging. "You act like conservatives are silenced," Whoopi pressed, "but you've got a huge megaphone. You're here, aren't you? So where's this so-called censorship?" The audience laughed, thinking Whoopi had her pinned. But then Caroline paused, just long enough to let the room settle. She looked right at Whoopi and asked, "Are you done?" The studio went dead quiet. Whoopi blinked, thrown off. She wasn't ready for that. Before she could bounce back, Caroline took over. She didn't yell or rush. She just locked eyes with Whoopi and said it again, slow and steady. "Are you done?" The question lingered, sharp as a blade. Whoopi's jaw twitched, but Caroline wasn't waiting. She smiled, just a little, and dropped a bomb. "You say conservatives aren't silenced, that we've got platforms. Okay, then, when's the last time the show let a conservative voice finish a thought? Not a day, not this week. When?" The crowd stirred. Some co-hosts fidgeted. Whoopi waved it off. "Oh, please, we've had conservatives here tons of times." But Caroline wasn't buying it. She nodded, like she was thinking it over, then leaned in. "Sure, they've been here. But how does it go? Do you let them talk? Or do you interrupt, laugh at them, and call their ideas crazy while the crowd cheers you on?" Whoopi tried to brush it off with a laugh. "That's not how it works," she said, shaking her head. But Caroline held her gaze. "Isn't it? Tell me a conservative could sit here, challenge you, and get treated fairly." We both know that's not the deal. The audience wasn't laughing now. The vibe had flipped, Caroline was in control, and Whoopi was scrambling. She'd walked right into something she couldn't handle, and it was only getting started. Things were already heating up, but nobody saw the real fireworks coming. Caroline Levitt had just flipped the script on Whoopi Goldberg, and the studio was buzzing with tension. The audience, usually quick to back Whoopi, wasn't so sure anymore. Even the co-host looked antsy, sensing this wasn't the usual View showdown. Whoopi's jaw tightened. She wasn't used to losing her grip like this. Her fingers tapped the table as Caroline pressed her point. "You talk a big game about tolerance, Whoopi," she said, her voice steady as a rock. "But tolerance means letting other opinions breathe, not just the ones you like." Whoopi opened her mouth to snap back, but Caroline wasn't done. She straightened her mic and hit them with a line that stopped everyone cold. Maybe that's why people are tuning out this show more and more. The room exploded, gasps, a few claps, total shock. Whoopi froze, her eyes wide. The co-hosts darted looks at each other, unsure how to jump in. Caroline had just done the unthinkable. She'd called out The View on The View, and she didn't even blink. Whoopi tried to play it off, letting out a stiff laugh. "Oh, sweetheart," she said, her tone dripping with sarcasm, "you're sitting here right now, aren't you? So clearly we're giving other voices a shot. You conservatives just can't handle being questioned when you're off base." The crowd murmured, torn on whether to cheer, but Caroline wasn't fazed. She tilted her head, her face calm but unyielding. Questioned? No. Whoopi, what conservatives can't stand is being yelled over, mocked, and tagged as trouble just for thinking differently. Whoopi rolled her eyes, but Caroline kept going. "You preach free speech every day, telling everyone this show's about open talk. But the second someone pushes back, like right now, you don't argue. You attack. You laugh it off. And if that doesn't work, you try to drown them out." Whoopi shifted, crossing her arms. "Oh, spare me," she shot back. "Nobody's silencing you, Caroline." But Caroline leaned in closer, her voice crisp and clear. "Really? So when's the last time you let a conservative sit here and make their case without getting cut off or trashed? Go ahead, name one." Whoopi went quiet, totally blank. The crowd didn't move. The silence dragged on, and the cameras caught every second of Whoopi fumbling for an answer. Caroline didn't let up. She let that awkward pause sink in, then dropped the hammer. Maybe people are done with this show because it's not about real talk anymore. It's just you shouting your take and calling it truth. The audience lost it. Some cheered, others gasped, a total mix of chaos. The co-hosts looked like deer in headlights. Whoopi's face was a mask of frustration. She'd just lost the reins of her own show, and she knew it. The vibe in the studio was electric, unbearable, like a storm about to break. Whoopi took a sharp breath, then forced another laugh. "I'm done with this mess," she muttered, flicking her hand like she could wave it all away. Caroline didn't budge. She sat there, cool and collected, and asked, "You're done?" Whoopi's eyes narrowed. "Yeah, I'm done," she snapped. "I don't sit here wasting time on people who just want to stir up junk." The crowd gasped again. The tension was off the charts. The co-hosts froze, glancing between the two women as the moment spiraled. Caroline leaned forward just a bit. "Sounds to me like you don't waste time on people you can't steer," she said, calm but cutting. That was it. The place erupted. Scattered claps, shocked murmurs, total madness. Whoopi's temper flared. "You know what? I don't need to hear this garbage," she barked, yanking off her mic and tossing it on the table. The producers freaked out behind the scenes. Whoopi shoved her chair back and stood, her whole body stiff with anger. "This show's about real talk," she said, her voice shaking, not giving air to this nonsense. Then she turned and stormed off right off the set. The cameras wobbled, unsure where to point. Caroline just sat there, hands folded, watching her go. The studio went silent, like the air had been sucked out. The producers scrambled, debating whether to cut away or let it roll. The audience didn't know what to do. Some shifted in their seats, a few clapped, but not for Whoopi this time. One co-host finally chimed in, laughing nervously. "Well, that just happened, didn't it?" And just like that, the chaos hit a whole new level. The internet was about to catch fire, and this moment was far from over. The dust hadn't even settled from Whoopi Goldberg's dramatic exit, but the real storm was just kicking off. The second she marched off that View set, leaving Caroline Levitt sitting there unfazed, the moment took on a life of its own. The studio was still reeling, producers scrambling, audience buzzing, cameras catching every awkward beat. But out in the digital world, things were moving at lightning speed. Before the show could even think about cutting to a commercial, people were already hitting record on their phones, clipping the chaos, and blasting it across every platform imaginable. Twitter, YouTube, TikTok, Facebook, you name it, that clip was there, spreading like wildfire. By the time the View's team could catch their breath, the raw footage had racked up millions of views. This wasn't just a blip, it was a full-on phenomenon. Social media lit up instantly. Hashtags started popping off left and right. Hashtag Whoopi walks off. Hashtag Caroline owns the view. Hashtag view meltdown. People who'd never even tuned into the show were glued to their screens, watching that standoff on loop. The comments were brutal, no holds barred. Whoopi just handed Caroline the win. She bailed the second she couldn't call the shots, one user wrote. Another chimed in, never thought I'd see the view get exposed like that. Caroline didn't even break a sweat. Even some die-hard fans of the show weren't buying Whoopi's move. Been watching for years, but that was weak, someone posted. If she had a solid comeback, she'd have stayed. She ran instead. This wasn't just chatter, it was a tidal wave of reaction, and it wasn't slowing down. Conservative outlets pounced on it like sharks smelling blood. Fox News had the clip on repeat before the day was out, splashing it across primetime with a headline that screamed, "Whoopi Goldberg bolts after Caroline Levitt shreds her hypocrisy." The Daily Wire jumped in too, posting, "Watch Whoopi crumble when Caroline brings the heat." Newsmax went all out, bringing in a body language pro to pick apart the meltdown. That wasn't just annoyance, the expert said on air. That was Whoopi realizing she was outmatched and bolting for the exit. They replayed it over and over, analysts chewing on every frame, Whoopi's tight jaw, Caroline's steady stare. It was pure gold for them, and they weren't letting it go. But the mainstream media? They tried to flip the story. CNN brushed it off as a heated exchange blown out of proportion. MSNBC spun it hard, saying Whoopi stood her ground against nonsense, and her walk-off was some kind of bold statement. The Washington Post even ran a piece slamming Caroline, claiming she'd baited Whoopi for a cheap reaction instead of real talk. But here's the thing, none of that stuck. People had the unedited video right in front of them. They didn't need pundits to tell them what they'd seen with their own eyes. Whoopi couldn't handle the heat, and she left. Every time the big networks tried to twist it, folks just pointed back to the clip. The truth was too loud to spin. Then the internet did what it does best. It turned the whole thing into a meme fest. Within hours, Whoopi's stunned look and mic toss were everywhere. When you start a fight but realize you're losing, one meme read, plastered over her frozen face. Another showed her storming off with the caption, "Whoopi when Caroline pulls out the facts." People got creative. TikTokers reenacted the scene, mimicking her dramatic exit with over-the-top flair. Even celebs couldn't resist. A former View co-host tweeted, "About time someone stood up to Whoopi, props to Caroline." Late-night king Jimmy Fallon got in on it too, airing the clip on his show. "I haven't seen an exit that fast since my buddy ditched me at karaoke night," he quipped, cracking up the crowd. But the real knockout came from Caroline herself. She didn't need a big speech or some fiery rant. Nope, she just retweeted the viral clip with 3 little words, "Thought we'd debate." That was it. Simple, cool, and absolutely savage. The tweet blew up, millions of likes, endless shares, news channels quoting it live. It hit harder than anything Whoopi or The View could muster in response. Caroline didn't have to say more, the moment spoke for itself. And while the internet kept buzzing, the fallout was just revving up behind the scenes. While the internet was still buzzing over that jaw-dropping View moment, things were getting messy behind the curtains. Whoopi Goldberg's walk-off didn't just light up social media, it sent the show's producers into a full-on panic. They knew this wasn't some small hiccup they could shrug off. By the next morning, they'd thrown together a statement to smooth things over. Yesterday's show got a little intense, it read. "We love a good debate, but we're all about keeping it respectful. Can't wait to get back to the big talks ahead." It was a polished, safe line, classic damage control. But the fans? They weren't biting. The clip of Whoopi storming out was still everywhere, and no fancy words could erase what everyone had already seen. Twitter kept the heat on, churning out memes nonstop. One showed Whoopi's chair spinning with the caption, "When you pick a fight but can't finish it." Another had Caroline's cool stare labeled, "Facts don't care, so I guess you're out of here, Whoopi." For years, The View had painted conservatives as the ones dodging tough talks, but now the tables had flipped hard. The world had watched Whoopi bail, not Caroline, and that image wasn't fading anytime soon. Whoopi stayed quiet for a full day, which wasn't like her at all. Normally, she'd jump right into the fray when drama hit. People started guessing, was she told to zip it by the higher-ups? Or was she just waiting to see how bad it'd get? Either way, the silence only fueled the fire. Finally, on the next episode, Whoopi broke her hush. She sat at the table, looking less sure than usual. "I walked off because I'm not here to play games with bad takes," she said, her voice tight, almost rehearsed. "Some folks show up to stir the pot, not talk for real." The audience clapped, but it didn't feel genuine, like they were just going through the motions. No matter how she framed it, the facts didn't budge. She'd chosen to leave. Nobody forced her out or shut her down. She exited on her own. And all the spin in the world couldn't wipe that from people's minds. The clip kept circling, a constant reminder of who'd really ducked the fight. Meanwhile, Caroline Levitt didn't even need to keep swinging. She'd already landed her punch. While Whoopi and the producers scrambled to patch things up, Caroline stayed above the noise. But she did drop one more gem later that week in an interview. "I didn't go on The View to start a circus," she said, smooth and confident. "I went for a real conversation." Then she paused, letting it sink in, and added, "But if they bolt the second you question their story, well, that says it all, doesn't it?" Pow, that line hit the headlines like a thunderclap. It spread just as fast as the original clip, and people ate it up. Caroline's calm vibe next to Whoopi's fiery exit? Night and day. The contrast was impossible to miss. By the end of that week, The View's numbers took a dip. Conservative channels wouldn't let it go, replaying the showdown on every show, every podcast, every radio slot. They made sure nobody forgot Caroline owning the moment. Whoopi tried to act like it was business as usual, dodging any mention of the clash in the days after. But the damage stuck. Her reputation had a dent now. She could brush it off, sidestep it, move on, but the internet's memory is long. That video wasn't going anywhere. It sat there, ready for anyone to pull up, a permanent mark of the day she walked away. ABC execs weren't thrilled either. Word got out that the big shots were fuming over how Whoopi handled it. Sponsors started getting jittery, and suddenly The View was in crisis mode. This wasn't just a rough episode, it was a wake-up call. For years, they'd pushed this idea they could take on any challenge, any voice. But when Caroline stepped up and poked holes in their game, they didn't rise to it, they ran. No matter what Whoopi did next, that truth lingered. She could dodge the topic forever, but the question wouldn't quit. If she was all about open debate, why'd she leave the table? The clip said it all, and the fallout was only picking up steam. The chaos from that View showdown didn't just fizzle out, it kept rolling like a runaway train. Whoopi Goldberg's team was still reeling, trying to mop up the mess, but the clip of her storming off wasn't going anywhere. It was stuck in the public's mind, a moment too big to bury. Caroline Levitt had turned a random TV debate into a spotlight on everything The View claimed to stand for, and it wasn't a flattering look. For years, Whoopi and the crew had sold the idea they were champs of free talk, fearless against any pushback. But when Caroline stood her ground, cool and sharp, it was Whoopi who bolted, not the other way around. That gap between their words and actions? It was glaring now, and people weren't letting it slide. The show's ratings stayed shaky, and the buzz wouldn't quit. Conservative outlets kept the clip alive, hammering it home on every platform. Meanwhile, ABC bigwigs were sweating. Rumors swirled they'd chewed Whoopi out for letting it spiral. Sponsors twitched, uneasy about the heat. The View tried to bounce back, acting like it was no big deal, but the sting lingered. Whoopi dodged the topic on air, hoping it'd fade. But the internet doesn't forget, it never does. That video sat there, a click away, proof of the second she lost her cool and walked away. No spin, no excuse could rewrite it. If she was all about real debate, why'd she ditch the chair? That question hung heavy, unanswered. Caroline, though, she didn't need to say much more. Her point was made calmly, cleanly, brutally. She'd shown up, faced the fire, and left Whoopi scrambling. It wasn't just a win. It was a moment that flipped the script on who really ducks the tough stuff. And here's the kicker. It's still out there, waiting for you to watch. So, what do you think? Was Caroline the champ here? Or did Whoopi have a reason to bounce? Drop a comment below. Let's hear your take on this wild ride. One thing's for sure. That day on The View isn't fading anytime soon. It's a lesson in what happens when the mask slips and the truth steps up.